Some of them were doctors, some of them were administrators, and it was bringing people together, the ones who are currently doing the work. Is nobody understands the process better than the people who are in the process.
Welcome to Process Pioneers, the show that takes a deep dive into the minds of decision makers, key influencers, and process experts who are pioneering the world of everything process.
Welcome to another episode of Process Pioneers. My name is Daniel Rayner. I'm the host of Process Pioneers. And in each episode, I get the privilege of sitting down with different people in different organizations, and we talk about business process management, anything to do with process, whether you're a project leader, you're a program manager, whether you're a BPM consultant, whoever it is, we talk about process from their experience and their perspective. And today I have the absolute privilege of sitting down with Shane Hastie, who is the Director of Community Development at ICAgile. Now, Shane is also part of the core team that wrote Babok version 3. He's got a book out called #No Projects, and he's also the host of a podcast, another podcast, InfoQ's Engineering Culture. Shane, thanks for joining me.
Thank you very much, Daniel. It's a pleasure to be here.
So that was a very quick introduction to I'd imagine the extensive history and career that you've got. So I'd love to pass the ball over to you to give the audience a bit more of a background of where, I guess, starting with where did your interest in processes begin, or when did that first, I guess, get introduced to you, and then take us on a journey leading to where we are today.
Ooh. I'm going to go back nearly 4 decades.
Okay.
In 1982, I became a computer programmer. I did a 3-month COBOL training course, and I got deeply engrossed in building software. At that stage, working largely in the mainframe environment, and fairly shortly moved into an environment where we were doing what at that stage, and this was very, very early on, called end user computing, where
Right.
I was sitting down next to, in the banking world, people from the loans department, for instance, the leaders in the loans management space, and talking with them about, okay, what are the things that you need to be more effective in your role? We've got this
Right.
huge repository of data, but that doesn't really help.
Yes.
How do we turn this into actionable information?
Right.
And then there was a logical progression from that of actionable information into things we can actually do stuff with. And that's where we started talking about, okay, the business processes that support this,
Right.
whatever this might have been in that context.
Yes.
Then late 80s, I started my own company. This was very much a consulting development organization, ended up working primarily in the small to medium-sized airline space, doing specialist back office systems and actually running a bureau service for a number of small to medium airlines. This was around Africa. I was based out of South Africa at the time.
Right.
And process was what we did. We happened to use some technology to support it, but it was really about the business processes that enabled, in this case, it was the airlines to bill other airlines. It was the revenue accounting, interline billing for airlines. A lot of very clear rules from the International Air Transport Association,
Right.
but also a whole lot of stuff that was okay. In order to comply with this rule, what do we actually have to do? How do we run the organization?
Yes.
Then came home to New Zealand. I'm a Kiwi by birth, but I'd lived overseas for many years. Came back to New Zealand, largely still in the software space, but working more and more in that intersection of software and process, and the business analysis was in the 80s we called it systems analysis. In the 90s it became a more business analysis was
Right.
the thing where it actually The IIBA, International Institute for Business Analysis, founded in 2001, I think it was.
Right.
Got involved quite early with them in terms of looking at the role of analysis and the value of analysis. By that stage, I'd shifted into a training organization, SoftEd, where I spent 15 years as trainer, consultant, support, working with large and small organizations, helping them to adjust and adapt very often their software development process, but also other parts of their processes. Was privileged to work with people like Alex Sharp,
Yes.
and others in the space.
Yep.
Learned sitting at the feet of the masters in many ways,
Yep.
and got involved, as you said, with the production of the business analysis body of knowledge version 3. I was one of the core team there, and there in that version, business process management was one of the key business domains. Another one was something that was also very close to my heart, Agile. So
Right.
the intersection there as well. And today, more and more, it's seeing the application of agile thinking outside of information technology. We'll call it business agility. And how do we make processes fundamentally adaptive and responsive?
Right.
As we've seen over the last year, as the COVID has hit the world, fixed cast in concrete processes get in the way.
Right.
Doesn't mean there's no value in process. You've got to have good processes, but those processes have to be fundamentally adaptable and to support the organization rather than becoming millstones around their neck.
Yes. Right. And so I want to dive into that a little bit further, because I know that, you've got a lot to do with Agile at the moment. And I know some people are in the business process management space. Some people love Agile. We hear some people that we're doing Agile, not BPM. We're doing BPM, not Agile. But talk to us, how does Agile and BPM complement one another, or do they complement one another?
They are two sides of the same coin in many ways.
Right.
First of all, from an Agile is at its core, it's a mindset. A horrible hackneyed term. It's a philosophy.
Yes.
It's a way of thinking about work.
Right.
And agility in this context is the ability to adapt and respond to changing circumstances in a way that takes advantage of those and enables sustainability in the organization.
Right.
As circumstances change in the organization, so do our processes have to, and the two have to be coupled tightly hand in hand. If your processes become a sea anchor that is slowing you down, then in turbulent times, that can actually destroy the organization.
Right.
On the other hand, if there is no process, if there is absolute anarchy, that can destroy the organization too.
Right.
So we sometimes use the metaphor of surfing on that creative edge of chaos.
Yes.
What is the just enough in terms of the process framework?
Yep.
To enable us to be effective, maybe the borders, the boundaries, the buffers that we work within, but then inside that, how do we enable our people to be creative and innovative and effective? So it's finding that right balance.
Yes, right.
And for different contexts, different organizations, different environments, that balance is going to be different.
Yes,
and
right.
Over time, that balance is going to change in the organization. So it's the dynamism.
Yes.
That I think there's a misconception.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, there's multiple misconceptions. One, there's the misconception that Agile is chaos.
Right.
And the other is the misconception that actually doing good process management requires casting everything in stone.
Right.
Neither of those is true. Yeah, so the misconceptions that are out there, one about agility being an excuse for chaos, and the other about the process management is a way of restricting and controlling. Whereas really what it's about is finding that middle ground where surfing perhaps on that edge of chaos, where organizations can be responsive enough, adaptive enough, and still be stable enough.
Right. Right.
And yeah, for every organization, that exact balance is going to be different.
Yes. Yes.
And over time, that balance will be different as well.
Very true. Yeah.
There's multiple dimensions, multiple aspects there.
Yes, that's right. I'd imagine that this year really would have been very turbulent and would have kept a lot of organizations on their toes in terms of how they understand and manage and improve their processes.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a meme in terms of digital transformation. You know, who was most responsible for digital transformation in your organization? Was it the CEO? Was it the CIO? Was it the CTO? Was it the CMO? No, it was COVID-19.
That's right, and quite true, I'd imagine. But looking at business process management for an organization that is looking to adopt, a process centric form of management, what are some of the biggest challenges that you see an organization face, or mistakes, either?
Well, one of the biggest, most common mistakes is the sledgehammer to squash a fly. What is the minimum viable process that will be sufficient to create the good boundaries within which your creative people can be creative?
Right.
And look at process from that MVP, minimum viable process perspective,
Yes.
and be careful not to overlay too much.
Right.
Where don't let it fall into extensive bureaucracy. Even in heavily compliance-driven organizations, go to the core. What is the underlying intent of the compliance legislation, for instance? And then how do we ensure that we achieve that without necessarily going to the 27-page rule book or whatever?
Yes.
Working with a large banking organization, working in the Treasury Department, we saw this at one point. This was working with a group who were trying to adopt an agile process to their software development, but also to their business process design within that space.
Right.
And the immediate reaction was, oh, no, we can't do that. The auditors won't like it. So a group of us who were working with the organization said, okay, can we talk to the auditors, please? And we got the internal and external auditors to come into the organization. We had a half-day workshop where we were talking to them about the processes we were planning to use.
Right.
And a big chunk of it was removing some of the fear, the FUD, the fear, uncertainty, and doubt about changing process, overcoming the agile is just chaos misconceptions, talking about what was the process we were trying to use, and how were we going to build into that process the compliance and audit rules.
Yes.
And it turned out that what we needed to do was to add about 2 hours worth of extra effort to every Scrum sprint, every iteration or cycle of work. Every 2 weeks, we would deliver product, and part of that delivery was built into the what we call the definition of done, the list of things that have to be there, was here is the compliance artifact relating to the work that we have done. And it was directly auditable.
Right.
And in fact, from an audit perspective, it was more transparent.
Yes. Okay.
Because it was immediately visible if things were off track.
Right.
It wasn't wait until the product is deployed and we then do the forensic backtrack. It's actually there in your face. If something is wrong, you couldn't hide it.
Yes, right.
So the audit group, both internal and external, looked at that and said, you know what, this is a better process than we've ever had before.
Yes, right, right.
But it did require the conversations.
Yes.
And the implementation of that disciplined approach.
Right.
And Agile is a disciplined approach to work.
Yes, yeah.
There is a lot of tragile out there. Phil Abernathy coined that term, there's a hang of a lot of tragile.
Now, different organizations, when they're looking at BPM, they'll probably see different value that that they have an appetite for, whether it is to make sure that they've got everything in place for the auditor, or whether they're looking at saving costs or saving time or generating revenue.
Yep.
I'd imagine that you've seen a number of successful process improvements where it's delivered a lot of value to an organization. So is there anyone in particular that may come to mind where, you took that process, whether it was minor tweaks or radical innovation to it, and it delivered great results?
I'm not at liberty to mention some of the names, but I can talk to the type of organization. One that that we saw a huge difference was in a healthcare group. Looking at, now this was a New Zealand-wide healthcare organization that offered a variety of different health services, and every area was that they had a lot of friction in the interface points.
Right.
So we got people together for a series of workshops where, first of all, we were looking what's the common aspects. What are the things, and again, what's the minimum viable process, the minimum amount that we can put in place that will ensure consistency across the different groups, but also allow for that local optimization for the local way of working. If we consider, any country, but New Zealand, certainly the difference between something that is being done in Auckland versus Timaru, the large city, small town, same services being offered, a lot of commonality in that, but the way they're going to be delivered, very, very different.
Right, right.
So one of the first steps in that process was to define what is that minimum core that needs to be common, and then what do we leave to the local team to figure out for themselves.
Yes.
So that, again, that concept of the minimum viable process there, and then we looked at the interface points.
Yes, right.
What are the handoffs? How many handoffs are there? And one of the most common things that we see, it's one of the sources of waste, is there's too many handoffs, things going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, maybe multiple layers, unnecessary layers of permission, for instance.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So we identified a number of pain points at the handoffs. We removed some of those handoffs so that it wasn't actually, when we really got down to the core, it wasn't necessary for a nurse in one place to get permission from a lead nurse in somewhere else.
Right.
They could define those guidelines quite clearly and put that power back into the hands of the people doing the work, so to speak.
Yes, yes.
So removing some of the unnecessary handoffs, or as many of the unnecessary handoffs as possible. And then with the handoffs that were there, putting in place service level agreements and those sorts of things between the different areas, so that that interface was very, very clearly and well understood.
Right.
What the provider needed, what the service requester needed to provide, and so forth.
Yes,
and that just removed a lot of the friction and enabled better patient outcomes in this case. That's what they were particularly focused on, was the turnaround time for tests and various other things for patients.
Right. That's great. And when you make an improvement to a process, that there'd be people listening right now that maybe they're from an organization that doesn't have a very process-centric way of going about delivering value. But talk to us about getting buy-in from the people whose process you're changing. They're the ones that are doing the work, that are carrying out the work, that have been doing it for the last 12 months, 5 years, 10 years. And you're going in there to be like, hey, this is the new process now. And depending on how you do that, may not go down too well. So talk us about, how do you get that buy-in?
The first thing you do is you don't impose process on them.
Right.
You bring them along on the journey and they design the new process.
Great.
And those workshops I was talking about, these were the people who are doing the work. I was facilitating it and using my knowledge of process engineering and process management to say, okay, here are some things that you may want to consider.
Right.
At no point did I say you need to do this.
Yes. Right.
It was, here's some stuff that I've seen elsewhere. Here is something you might want to consider. What do you think? And we had post-it notes and flip charts and pens, and people were moving the post-it notes themselves. So the people who were deeply part of the process were the ones who were designing the new process.
Right.
The other thing about that is they're the ones who know the pain.
Yes. That's right.
They're the ones who can intimately recognize exactly where, in this case, the patient problems, the patient care was falling through the gaps.
Right.
So, these were nurses, some of them were doctors, some of them were administrators, and it was bringing people together, the ones who are currently doing the work. Is nobody understands the process better than the people who are in the process. And you can be almost guaranteed that what is currently written down about the process is wrong.
Right.
So don't go to the process Bible and say, this is what people are doing. They are not.
Right.
They have adapted it to really what's needed in their context.
Yes.
And again, putting that framework of what's the minimum viable process and enabling the people in the middle to have that creative input.
Yes.
But do not impose change on people. Allow them to bring the change. Because if you start from that point of view, I fundamentally believe that every person in the workplace today, or the vast, vast majority, goes to work wanting to do a good job. Right. They care about the outcomes for their customers, clients, patients, whatever you want to call them.
Yes.
How do we enable them to be as effective as possible?
Right. That's great. And then now talking about getting that buy-in, but from the executive level or senior leadership, because if an organization is to adopt BPM, it's going to be a bit of an uphill battle if you don't have someone in the executive team that is sponsoring it and, is giving it the attention it deserves. So talk to us about what do they want to hear? What do they need to hear? How do you pitch BPM to that level?
In terms of the business outcomes.
Right.
Start talking to those people about the things that keep them awake at night.
Yes.
It's going to be customer satisfaction, employee engagement, profitability, time to market. Those are the metrics that they care about.
Right.
The number of widgets that are produced in an hour, who cares?
Yes.
The number of times a customer complains, we care.
Right.
So relate the outcomes that we're looking for to the metrics that matter to the people who are leading the organization.
Right. That's great. And now talking about, we've already talked about getting buy-in from the process practitioners and from that executive level as well. What are some of the every organization is different and you're going to be dealing with different people. What are some of the objections that might arise when implementing BPM?
One of the most common is we've always done it this way.
Right.
Institutional bad habits.
Right.
And what's underlying that more often than not is fear.
Okay.
And now we come to organization culture. If the organization culture is one of blame and fear, no change will stick.
Right. Okay.
Because I will be looking to protect my status quo.
Mm-hmm.
So it has to be safe to experiment.
Yes.
We talk about safe to fail. How do we make, and this is a term from Henrik Knieberg talking about the Spotify culture, how do we make the blast radius of mistakes small?
Right.
So that when something does go wrong, we learn from it.
Yes. Yes.
Mistakes are going to happen.
Yes.
This is the human condition. We are dealing with human beings. Changes are going to fail.
Right.
This is how we learn. So we need to have that safety within the organization. And we can say this as much as we like, it's safe to experiment, it's safe to make a mistake, unless leadership follow that through. So the first time something goes wrong and a middle manager or a senior manager says, "Who did that?" we've destroyed whatever trust was there.
Right. Okay.
The response to a mistake has to be, what can we learn from this?
Yes.
So it's not about how we say it's safe to fail, it's how we show that it's safe to fail.
Yes. Right.
Now, there are some environments where that failure is catastrophic. So
yes.
What do we do to keep that blast radius as small as possible?
Right.
And this is about breaking things apart into very small experiments. Don't bet the whole organization on one change. Implement a pilot, see how it works, what happens with this group of customers, then slowly expand it to the next one and the next one.
Yes. Yes.
At any point, be prepared to pivot, to change direction.
Right.
It's that adaptability that is the key to success.
Yes. Right. Right. And I think that the culture is so important. I think talking to, creating that atmosphere or that environment where the process practitioners feel comfortable to make mistakes and learn from their mistakes, but also to bring ideas forward. As we were talking about earlier, they're the ones that are doing the work. They're the ones that are recognizing the pain points. If you haven't created a space for them to bring their own suggestions forward, then it's not going to improve.
Absolutely. As if you want to know how to improve a process, talk to the people who are in it.
Right. Yes, that's right. Now, looking at the future of business process management, and every organization is at a different level of BPM maturity, whether they've began or not, and so different organizations will require different things at different times. They'll require a different focus. But looking to the future of BPM, or let's just say the next 2-3 years, what do you think organizations need to be focusing on or should be focusing on?
It's okay. For me, the single most important thing that organizations can do that is going to make a difference to their long-term survival is encourage a culture of experimentation and learning.
Right.
Create a space where people, with the natural human creativity that is inherent in the people doing the work,
yes,
is able to be reflected, where it is invited, where it is celebrated, where learning is what it's about.
Right.
This year has shown us that we have to be fundamentally adaptive and responsive.
Yes.
As a global society at every level, I sit in a privileged position. I'm in New Zealand. We've come through COVID-19 better than most countries in the world.
Yes. Yep.
Why? Because our government was prepared to experiment and learn. During the early lockdowns, there were a number of times when our Prime Minister got up in front of the whole country and said, you know what? We've just learned something. What we thought we were doing was wrong.
Right.
We're changing the rules.
Yes.
Because the rules that we thought we had in place, we have just learned that no longer applies.
Okay.
And she was in front of the country acknowledging this. That example meant through all of the government departments, it was safe to do so.
Right.
And private industry looked at that and said, you know what? Works for them. So that ability to, again, adapt and respond. It was hard. But that example to me stands out.
Yes.
And it's that, and it needs to be within the organization. It starts at the top. It starts with the most senior executives standing up and admitting we don't know everything.
Yes.
We are learning.
Yes.
Because the next 2 to 3 years are going to be a radical learning path for every organization in the world. There is no new normal.
Right.
The old normality is gone. We're going to see outbreaks. We're going to see new situations. There will be vaccinations. There will be failures at all sorts of levels there. There's going to be logistics problems. I'm sure there's going to be all sorts of things that are going to go wrong.
Right.
Shooting the messengers and blaming people for that is not going to help.
Yes.
So taking that vulnerability, adaptability, and learning,
yes,
is where it needs to happen.
That's great. That's really good. And now for those people that are listening, and, in a 30-minute conversation, we can only fit very little in, we're only scraping the surface of a number of different topics, but I think the purpose of it is to spark ideas, to spark collaboration, and to spark conversation. That I've received plenty of feedback from different people that have watched an episode. Just one line that someone has said has sparked something that they've gone back, talked to their team about, and having your own podcast yourself that you host. I'm assuming that's what happens in that case as well. People listen, they pull gold nuggets out of it.
One little gem.
Exactly. And so, for people that will be listening to this conversation that we've been having about BPM, and, particularly in the ANZ region where it's maybe where we are behind Europe in our process-centric way of thinking, or that's probably a common feedback or opinion I hear, I guess.
I'm going to say different, not
okay,
but that's
okay.
That's a particular bias.
So for that person that is listening and they want to learn more about BPM, they're not from an organization that's very process-centric, and they don't have many people that they can talk to that are on the same wavelength. Where should that person go to learn more? Because obviously the internet has pretty much everything, but it can be quite overwhelming to know where to focus.
Okay, I'm going to do a shameless plug. And I'm going to point people to my book, or my Evan Labord and myself. The book is the title is #No Projects. The subtitle, A Culture of Continuous Value.
Right.
And this is about moving away from project-based thinking to product-based, value stream-based thinking for knowledge worker organizations.
Right.
Where you're in the knowledge worker space, where the value that you're delivering comes from the creative work of human beings, then generally the project approach gets in the way.
Yes, right.
That's going to be one of the things I would point people to. Another is I would point people to the International Consortium for Agile, ICAgile,
Mhm.
ICAgile.com, pretty straightforward, and look at the learning outcomes that we have there in
Right.
the agile delivery space and in the business agility space.
Great.
And in the business agility space, where organizations are adopting an agile way of thinking and working across the organization as a whole, taking these ideas outside of information technology into other parts of the organization.
Yes.
So those are two, InfoQ and ICAgile, and I'm assuming we'll be able to put the links into the show notes.
Absolutely. And guys, if you're listening to this and you've pulled something from what Shane's been talking about and you want to delve into that further, I encourage you to reach out to Shane, connect with him on LinkedIn. Feel free to ask him questions, and I'm assuming he'd be more than happy to have that conversation. But
very happy to.
But Shane, it's been an absolute pleasure sitting down with you. We've talked about a number of different things today, and I'm really excited to hear the feedback from the viewers and what they've been gleaning from it. So thanks for giving up your time for us today.
Thank you very much, Daniel. It's a pleasure.